Hello and welcome to another edition of 41 Files. I'm Taylor Hemness from 41 Action News Today here in the 41 Podcast studio. We've got a great episode for you today detailing the mayoral election coming up in Kansas City. But we want to start by taking a moment to recognize a colleague of ours and where the name of this podcast came from. We've had more than 60 41 Files podcasts recorded so far. Digital producer Sam Hartle is here with me. And Sam, the name of this podcast was inspired by 41 Action News reporter Tom Dempsey. We were both in the room when Tom came up with that title.
I think Stephen was also in the room.
Yeah, I was here.
Stephen Dial
not to forget.
Yeah, Stephen Dial. I was waiting to get to you, Stephen. 41 Action News reporter Stephen Dial was also in the room. But we want to take a minute to shout out to Tom. Tom is a phenomenal reporter here at 41 Action News. Young man in his early 30s and was just diagnosed just a couple of weeks ago with testicular cancer. And as we get ready to record this podcast, he is finishing up his surgery. We understand he had his surgery scheduled for this morning, so we can't move forward without taking a moment to wish Tom well, tell him that we love him and we're praying for him. We hope that very soon he's able to get back here in the newsroom and continue doing the excellent work he does on a regular basis. So, Tom, we appreciate your work and we hope to see you again soon, buddy. So we heard from Sam, we heard from Stephen, 41 Action News reporter Kat Reed is in the studio as well. Hi, Kat.
Hello. I must say this is a preferable time for me. This 1:30 is nice. I had to do an 8 a.m. the other day.
That's
Well,
right.
maybe you need to talk to the candidate.
Thank you for doing 1:30.
That's right.
Absolutely.
That other voice you hear there is Kansas City mayoral candidate and Kansas City Councilwoman Jolie Justice joining us to take part in this interview. Jolie, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
It's great to be here. Thanks so much.
That other interview that Kat is referencing there, the 8 a.m. yesterday was Councilman Quentin Lucas, your opponent in this race. And so as you listen to this podcast, here's how this worked out. We put the names in a hat and with several witnesses in the newsroom, drew them out. And so your name came up first. So as you listen to the recording, you will hear Councilwoman Justice's interview with us right now. And then we'll take a quick break and you'll hear Councilman Lucas's interview from yesterday as we go over the topics of this race. But again, thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So we're about a month out now from election day as we record this podcast. So many forums that you guys are going through, several of them scheduled. We've got one for 41 Action News coming up about a week before the actual election. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But what's the schedule like for you right now as you've already gone through a primary and now you continue? What's it like running for mayor right now?
You know, it's really exciting. It is without doubt the busiest I've ever been in my life, and that's okay because we've got a big city and a lot of things to talk about, and I'm ready to do it. But I mean, just a day-to-day schedule. You usually leave the house somewhere between 7 and 7:30 in the morning. We usually do have something going on at 8 o'clock, so I'm sorry you had to do that yesterday, Kat. And then, frankly, over the course of the day, you have meet and greets, you have neighborhood tours, you have debates, you have forums. Lunches just came back from the Northland, making sure that we were getting a legislative update on what happened in Jefferson City from our Northland delegation, and get home about every night about 10 o'clock or so, and then get up the next morning and start again.
And do it again. That's quite the schedule. So I want to start by asking you basically the same question that I got a chance to ask Councilman Lucas is, obviously there are a myriad of issues that you guys are discussing on a regular basis in this campaign. There are several that you want to address, and you've listed different ways that you prioritize those. This is not a single issue campaign. If it were, what would be the one that your name would be next to?
A single issue campaign. That's a very good question. One of the things that is incredibly difficult for a politician is to kind of parse it out.
Yeah.
I will tell you the most important issue we're talking about this campaign is crime and the violent crime in our community. And without question, that is the one thing that has all of the different debates, all of the different forums, all of the different meet and greets. That's always the top issue that we're talking about.
And on the topic of crime, since that is at the forefront of everyone's mind, tell us a little bit about your plans. And I know you've proposed the mayor. I'm now speaking too closely, I think. Sorry. We've talked about the deputy mayor of neighborhoods. Does that fit into your overall crime platform?
It does, but it's broader than that. I have spent the last 13 years of my career, first as a state senator and now as a city council person, working on issues of criminal justice reform. And so when I was down in Jefferson City, it was not easy. We worked across party lines, but we completely rewrote the criminal code. We actually passed the Justice Reinvestment Act, and those things are actually starting to move the needle. And when you look at crime in general. What I'm folding in as a part of that and moving that to the local level is making sure that we also add additional neighborhood police officers, that we have more coordination between City Hall and the police department on those issues. I think that if we take the approach of being smart on crime, that means specialty courts, that means mental health services and addiction. You fold in what we've done with criminal justice reform at the state level, and then you add in that neighborhood policing component, that's really going to continue to make sure that we have a downtick, not just in violent crime, which we're seeing already, but also in our homicide rate.
I know in campaigns, and we're going to talk about crime more, but I know in campaigns, especially after the Trump era, some people get nicknames during the campaign trail, whether they're given by your opponent or by someone else. Some in the media and some just in community conversation have referred to you as Sly 2.0 as far as when candidates look at you and Councilman Lucas, what separates you guys from each other. One, are you frustrated by hearing that? And two, I know you've told me multiple times you're happy and not ashamed of having the mayor's endorsement. But do you see that as kind of that's not you?
Yeah, absolutely. I see that as not me. I am very proud to have the endorsement of Mayor Sly James. He has been a great leader over the last 8 years and really was one of the catalytic kind of game changers that we needed starting 8 years ago. But I am anything but Sly James 2.0. I am someone who has spent the last 13 years as an elected official, and prior to that, in my time as a pro bono lawyer, really doing things in a much different manner. I have a completely different leadership style, and while I agree that I want to keep the city moving forward the same way that Mayor Sly James did when he came into office, I also am someone who is going to be slowing things down a little bit because that's my leadership style. I have the ability to bring all voices together at the table, even folks I don't want to hear. And I sit down and I work through the tough issues, I follow through, and I make sure that we get things done. And that track record sets me apart. That track record and that ability to bring together diverse voices sets me apart. And I think I'm very proud of my accomplishments. At the same time, I'm proud of being endorsed by Mayor James.
Another big issue for you in this campaign is transportation, transit, and you have your proposal to create this Department of Transportation. Tell us about that and also kind of respond to maybe criticism that it's adding more bureaucracy or red tape at City Hall.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we've seen in cities that are starting to move the needle on things like mobility, equity of mobility, and making sure that we have, however you move around the city, a more seamless process is we're seeing cities move to a Department of Transportation. Most recently, we heard the new mayor in Atlanta say that this was a direction that they were heading in. We've seen it in Chicago. We've seen it in Seattle. Cities that are doing this are actually starting to make a difference because right now, when you look at what we're doing in Kansas City, we have several different departments that are already working on this issue. We have Public Works. We have the Parks Department, believe it or not, that is designing and implementing roads. We have the City Manager's Office. We have so many different entities just within City Hall alone. And we are not creating a new bureaucracy because we've already moved in this direction. We really have someone right now at City Hall whose job is to make sure that we're coordinating with the outside folks, meaning KCATA and Ride KC with the Streetcar Authority. What I'm doing is saying that we need to break down those silos that have really caused us problems on everything from potholes and when they're going to get filled to knowing how we're going to plan the next road and where those are going to be. We need to make sure that we do that from the same playbook. We've had this before as a city. It's not a new bureaucracy. It means more accountability, transparency, and really outcome for our residents.
How does your campaign change from the primary aspect to where it is now? Because as we know in the primary, several people were involved in that race, most of them city council members like yourself, and now you're down to just you and one other, and there are battle lines drawn, so to speak, whenever it becomes just you and one other person, no matter how well you two know each other, no matter how well voters know you with being members of the city council and with all the forums we've talked about, seeing you on a regular basis. How does it change going from competing against half a dozen or more people to one person where it's very clear some of the differences?
One of the things that's kind of nice, actually, and I hope that Kansas City appreciates this, is when there were 11 of us, you didn't really get to spend a whole lot of time really doing a deep dive into any specific issue. You had 11 people on stage. They would say, we've got this violent crime rate, we've got this housing problem, we've got this transportation problem, answer it in 60 seconds, and then each single candidate would go through. The fact that we are now able to actually spend a little bit more time doing the deep dive, I think has been very important for Kansas Cityans. I think they appreciate appreciate that. And they're starting to get kind of a clearer picture of what the differences are between the two of us. And that's really what the phase that we're shifting into now. Within the last 30 days, one of the most frequent questions we get is, how are you different than each other? And what are some of the things, both policy-wise, style-wise, vision-wise, that are different? And so Kansas Cityans are finally getting to get a little bit deeper dive into that.
It seems like one of those issues that, and I might just be editorializing this, it seems like you and Quentin have been trying to really plant your flag on is affordable housing. That's something that came up in the primaries, but really talked about now. I asked Quentin this yesterday, so I'll ask you this today. Some were questioning why he wasn't at the council meeting last Thursday in reference to a piece of legislation, potential legislation that he had as it pertains to affordable housing. Wanted to give you the same opportunity. What are your thoughts on that?
I think one of the frustrations that I have is when you have a legislative body and everyone's working on different issues at the same time, we have to make sure that we have council members who are following through. And one of the things that really became a frustration for me within the last week is we had a debate last week where Councilman Lucas was asked specifically, what has happened to this ordinance where 15% of all future development is going to be set aside for affordable housing? And his answer was that he was still waiting for some responses from Legal Aid of Western Missouri and UNI and some of the other stakeholders. But the problem is that's been sitting in front of the council since February 6th of this year. And my frustration became when we actually 2 days later were on the council floor, the bill was up for a vote, it was time to move it forward, and he wasn't there. And really it was one of those things where we all miss meetings. It happens. We all have other lives and other things and responsibilities. But he hadn't left any, instructions for the vice chair. We didn't know whether those issues that he had mentioned 2 days before had been resolved. And so here we are talking about housing and the importance of this to the campaign. And once again, one of these pieces of legislation gets sent back to the committee. And so while there's a lot of talk, we haven't seen follow through yet. And that's one of my biggest frustrations in the housing sense, because we have a lot of people who are speaking about this with a level of urgency that is critical. And I want to make sure, because I'm a sitting city council member, that we have city council members who are pushing these ideas forward, not just dropping them in a committee, but making sure that they get passed.
Last week, it seemed, was City Council endorsement week, with Jermaine Reed endorsing you, Catherine Shields going with Quentin Lucas. It's interesting because it's the counterparts did a little like swapperoo, if that's switcheroo. Swapperoo, let's make it a thing.
Never heard
I like swapperoo. I do.
So what was your reaction to Councilwoman Shields endorsing Lucas? Is that a big loss to you or no?
One of the things that people need to understand about this is we obviously all have allies on the council, and I understand that. I've been in politics long enough that I don't take any of this personally. In addition to Councilman Reed, I also have Councilman McManus from South Kansas City and Councilman Fowler from North Kansas City. And we have all of these endorsements because these are folks that I've been working well with on the council, people that know that I have the proven track record that they're looking for. I don't take any of this personally. I understand that Councilman Lucas and Councilwoman Shields have been allies on the council, and so I fully expected that endorsement and understand that.
You said recently in a forum, correct me if I'm wrong, Kat, it was yesterday. Well, you were busy. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jolie, it was yesterday, I think, in a forum. Do you regret any part of this whole airport thing? I know, you probably don't want a lot of people to harp on the airport process. I think the media has harped on it more than some in the public have cared to want to know about it. But is there any part of the airport process that you say, man, we should have did this a little different?
First of all, one of my proudest accomplishments over the last 4 years is taking that entire project through to its completion. Because as you might suspect, this was not an easy issue. This was something where we had 35% of Kansas City, Missouri residents even wanted a change out there at all. We had the council, the majority of them did not want a new terminal. They wanted a remodel. We had all of the different layers of the airlines and what their participation was going to be. If I had a time machine, is what you're asking me, and I could go back and change what we did, absolutely, I would have done a couple things differently. And the very first one is back in 2016, when the airlines came to Kansas City and said, we need a new single terminal airport at Kansas City International Airport. We want to pay for it and we want to back the debt. And then we as a city decided to press pause at that moment. I would have not advocated and I would have pushed very hard to not press pause. And instead, I would have shifted into public education mode to make sure that we take that message of why this is so critical to our city to the public. I would have also opened it up for an RFQ, RFI, RFP, whatever you want to call it, a request for additional information and proposals so that we could get some big ideas coming in about how we make sure that we take advantage of this offer from the airlines. And if we had done those things, we wouldn't have had the compacted schedule that we had later on. So that's number one. Number two, when we did have someone come forward with an idea, which was a public-private partnership with Burns and Mack with private financing, and they said to us, we can do this in a sole source manner. What do you think? Rather than saying, that's an interesting idea, let's have public hearings, let's talk to the council about it, we should have said, and I should have pushed for, and I did not, let's just open it up right now. Let's make sure we have a competitive bid process right now. Instead of trying to push it out first and get input on the sole source, we should have just said sole source is never on the table. And those are the two things that I wish I could have changed if I had a time machine to go back.
Do you think that if the city had not pressed pause back when the airlines first came to you guys, do you think that GO bonds would have passed? Because was part of that, the press pause, let's focus on getting this infrastructure plan. What do you think?
It would have taken a lot of public education because I would not want anything to interfere with the GO bonds. That had to be the top priority. And on days like today and yesterday, when we are seeing the flooding that's happening in the city, I am so thankful to Kansas City residents that they were willing to make that a priority. But I think that if we would have said to the Kansas City public, we're not making any decisions, but here's an offer we had from the airlines, and now we're going to put it out to see what the best ideas are on how to complete that offer, that people would have understand that we are looking for suggestions on how to take this offer while we're also working on the GO bond piece.
Coming off the airport situation, the words development and incentives, I think, are two very big parts of this campaign from both sides and from the entire voter spectrum as far as what people are interested in. Both campaigns have sort of drawn lines about where you stand. This candidate may be more pro this, or trying to get the voters to believe this candidate is more pro one direction or other. But that airport vote also represented something as far as the old school, new school versus for Kansas City voters of moving the city forward, so to speak, as you mentioned there, or kind of pushing back against change, so to speak, about making a big change there with the airport. All that to say, how do you read the electorate as far as what people are considering to be most important to them as voters right now? Is it about moving the city forward and furthering development, the trends that have started over the last few years and continuing to improve downtown? Is it about giving more people who are in a lower income situation better housing, access to more quality different items that some other people have? What do you find is the kind of the tone of the electorate right now is what people are looking for in their next mayor?
And what you have to do when you ask that question is make sure that you're asking for the entire city, which is a difficult thing because we have 319 square miles. And if you ask that question in each different council district, you're going to get a little bit different answer. I will say in general that what I have heard is that people are generally happy with the direction that the city's been going. They like the momentum that they've seen. They want to make sure that it keeps moving forward. But at the same time, I'm hearing very loud and clear that individuals also want to make sure we're addressing those issues that make your quality of life really substantially better at the neighborhood level. That means potholes, sidewalks, trash. That means making sure that we are addressing some of the long-term systemic issues that we've had relating to racial and economic inequities and segregation in our community. That means making sure that we're continuing to focus whenever we can on education. These are things that they want the mayor of Kansas City to do. They want the mayor of Kansas City to have a balance of making sure we continue to keep this momentum up while at the same time addressing those issues. And that's why I think my message of neighborhoods first and having a platform of bringing City Hall to the neighborhoods has really been resonating with voters because they're excited to see that someone is interested in being in the streets and actually working on the issues that they see when they walk out of their houses in the morning.
I want to switch gears for a second because Stephen talked about earlier, we'd talk about crime, and I feel like this is a good time to talk about that too. We are in mid-May, and our murder rate now is above 50 in Kansas City for the year 2019. Why?
You know, here's one of the most frustrating things that I have seen in this year in particular. Now, obviously, our homicide rate is unconscionable. The trauma that it is leaving in our communities is beyond generational at this point, and it is the most critical issue facing our city. What is really amazing to me right now, though, is that also in 2019, we have seen a drop in violent crime yet an increase in homicides. And if one person had the answer to why that was happening, that person would probably be elected, I don't know, president of the world. This person would have really the answer to something that is eluding everybody. But what I know is this, that Kansas City continues to keep moving forward on addressing the systemic issues that are leading to violent crime in the first place. And that is the first step. And so that's one of the things we have to continue to do. At the same time, when we do a certain program and it doesn't work, when it comes to the actual, focused deterrence or violence interruption or any of these things, we don't give up, we keep moving. And so I've talked to the police chief within the last week about what specifically they're doing right now, this month, about the number of homicides that we have. And they are working with our federal enforcement agents that are looking at the illegal weapons that are in the community. They are bringing it back down to the very core level of who is committing these homicides, where are the homicides taking place, and how can we bring those under control. And you're going to see some continued push in that space. And we have to make sure that we keep doing both at the same time, because this took us how many years to get here? Decades and decades and decades. And it's not going to be a short game to get out of it.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay. I was going to say, ahead of the primary, you walked the entire length of the city. And that's an issue that's extremely important to you, as pedestrian safety, bike safety. We have a bike plan that people put a lot of work, a lot of study into, that seems to be tied up at City Hall. What do you think about why isn't the bike plan passed?
That's a great question. Yeah, and I did walk the length of the city, and I did it because, number one, I'd been wanting to do it forever. And when the campaign opportunity came up, where I have all these amazing volunteers and young campaign workers who were willing to do it with me, the time was right. And so we actually walked from 163rd and Prospect, and we walked over a course of about 8 weeks to 144th and Interurban Road, which is north of the airport. And what I was able to see is that vulnerable road users in Kansas City, they're in a dangerous space. And that means individuals who have access to vehicles and choose not to drive them, and folks who don't have access to vehicles. And so one of the top issues that I have when we talk about crime, when we talk about housing, when we talk about education, is making sure that we have a better connected city. The bike plan that is put out there right now, I think there was a lot of misinformation that was out there about it. I think a lot of individuals think that the price tag that's with it means that we're going to spend all of that money right now, and then that money will not go to something else. And the reality is this is just a plan. This is saying that if we are able to, when we move forward, build a new street, resurface a new street, and it's going to be one of the streets where a bike lane would be appropriate, then we need to consider doing it at that time, and that's when we'll do the neighborhood engagement. And so what happened, unfortunately, as often happens during silly season, as we call it, is it got caught up in politics. And so the city manager, I think, smartly said, you know what, let's put a pin in this until after this June 18th election is over, because this issue is critical, and we need to make sure that it gets a fair hearing and gets a fair vote, and not have that June 18th election pushing people one way or another.
Before we wrap this up, let's lift the veil and not be so serious. Let's talk about something cool or something. What is your not saying the issues weren't cool before someone clips that soundbite. What has been maybe your guilty pleasure during this campaign, or that thing that, like, you got to have this to have peace, or what's that thing that has gotten you through or keeps you energized, or what's something that we don't know about Jolie that has helped Jolie be awake talking to us right now at 2 o'clock?
That's a great question, and I think it's a couple of things. I mean, number one, the fact that I was able to do that walk across Kansas City, that made all the difference. I think my team thought that could be times she could be on the phones, that could be times she could be at a meet and greet, but they knew if I didn't get that long walk every weekend, I was going to be upset. And so now they've shifted it where they make sure every weekend I have neighborhood walks, and so I'm out every weekend, sometimes 2 or 3 at a time, or 2 or 3 a day, walking throughout the neighborhoods, learning a little bit more about the history of neighborhoods. So that weekly walk and has been very important. For those of you who follow me on social media, you probably also know about the fact that I rescue dogs. And so at the end of the day, when I go home, no matter how late it is, it's great to be greeted by my wife, Lucy, and our 4 crazy rescue dogs. And so I love to sit down at the end of the day, catch up, kind of see how Diego's Tomorrow's day has been. And then I'm not going to lie that every night when I go to sleep, I think one of the things I have to do is either binge listen or binge watch one of my favorite podcasts or one of my favorite TV shows, and that helps me kind
What's
of just
one of your
turn my
favorite
brain.
TV shows? I was not a Game of Thrones person. I probably am the only person in the room that did not watch Game of Thrones. Anyway, I didn't watch it.
I don't think any of us did.
Did you watch
actually.
Game of Thrones?
I tuned it out. I don't season 4. Or
See,
something.
look
Yeah,
at that.
same.
So what?
Yeah.
What was
We've
your,
gathered
what was
us
your
all in
favorite?
one room.
So what's your favorite show?
Well, I will tell you that over the course of this campaign, I have binge watched the fall, and this is the entire campaign. This is not just recently, but I have binge watched. I have rewatched Parks and Rec because I feel it is probably one of the most
Yeah.
relevant things to what we do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
So that's happened, and then I'm just going to geek out here for a minute and let you know I've been binge watching Star Trek late at night.
Had a kid. Sam put a hand up in the air.
Love it.
I want
Yeah.
to touch on something else that you mentioned there because this campaign of yours does have an element of glass shattering to it because you mentioned your wife Lucy there. If you're elected, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you'd be the first openly gay mayor for Kansas City.
That is correct.
Chicago just elected the first openly gay female as mayor there in Chicago. What does that part of that campaign mean to you? I can't imagine it doesn't have some element of real weight for you as you go through this campaign. What does it mean for the city if you're elected moving forward?
It does, and to be clear, one of the things that I get asked a lot about is what does that mean for Kansas City? Does it mean you're only going to be pushing one agenda?
Sure.
And the answer is no. I mean, obviously, the frame that I see everything through may be different, but the reality is I've been the first openly gay state senator in the state of Missouri, and I am the first and only openly city council person in the history of Kansas City. And because of that, I know that I carry an extra burden. I know that I am representing individuals who are looking at me and saying, you know what? Maybe things are going to get better. Maybe I'm being bullied right now. Maybe I have a problem in my home life, but look at her. She's able to get out there and be herself and do things for the city and be accepted for it. And so I think it's important anytime you have a role model who's going to be the first in something. And so I take that not lightly at all. And it makes me incredibly proud to be representing a group of folks who haven't always felt represented at the elected level.
I have to say, on a lighter note, going back to the dogs, because I'm a dog lover, and I think that maybe you're the only person on social media who rivals me in terms of number of pictures posted of
Because
dogs.
Rosie is popular.
Rosie's all over. Diego is darling. I love seeing pictures of him. Why has rescuing dogs become such an important part of your home life? Tell me about what they've brought to your life.
Sure. Well, my first dog that I rescued was actually while I was in law school. And so just that constant companion that you have when you're going through this important time of life, and that relationship. And I had her for 14 years, and she was an amazing dog who actually went with me down to Jefferson City after I was a senator, served with me in the state capitol. I mean, they become part of your family. They become your coworkers. I mean, and, they also say in politics, it may have been Harry Truman, if you don't have a friend, get a dog or something like that. Or if
Yeah.
you want a friend, get a dog.
Get a dog.
Yeah. And so I think that's a big component of it. But as I mentioned, my wife, Lucy, rescuing dogs is a big thing to her. And so when we had 2 and we had the opportunity to rescue 2 more, I couldn't say no because of the strain and the stress that I put on her being gone all the time. I didn't want to say no to that. And so that's an extra component of making sure that dogs that would otherwise not have homes or who would be put down because they're at kill shelters, I'm always happy to help make sure that dogs get rehomed. And that's just, some people play golf and we rescue dogs. So
Okay, we have to ask you, this is probably the most important question as far as the fairness basis, a question that Quentin got that if we hadn't asked this, you're not going to get, and that's just unfair.
I know what this is.
The Chiefs record coming up. Stephen asked this yesterday, what Councilman Lucas's prediction for the Chiefs this season. Would you like to offer one?
And I said, don't say no lame. Oh, they're going to win the Super Bowl. Like unless
Unless
you
you
really
really
think,
feel that,
unless
yeah.
you really think. But what are your thoughts? I'll just leave it at that.
well, they're going to go undefeated and win the Super Bowl.
Look at that.
All right. All right.
And that was not a lame delivery.
No,
that
was
was
confident.
that was
No, I've also I've also agreed to fix the pitching woes of the Kansas
Look at
City
that.
Royals,
Oh.
and we're going to stop all the rain outside as well. So
What a campaign
Oh.
promise. I love that. Well, Councilman Justice, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for taking time out of what you described, obviously, as a very busy schedule to join us. Obviously, we want to remind people of the many, many forums that Councilwoman Justice and Councilman Lucas have done. Action. We have one that 41 Action News is hosting as well. That's coming up on June the 12th. You can join 41 Action News anchor Krista Dubill and Kevin Holmes. That's 6:30 to 7:30 Wednesday evening, June the 12th. That's the second to last forum in this race. It's at the Plaza branch of the Kansas City Public Library. It is open to the public, but if you can't make it, we'll have that live on our sister station, 38 The Spot, and we'll stream it on our Facebook as well. So on the 41 Action News Facebook page. So there's no reason to not watch that. That will be really your next to last chance to hear from these candidates one more time. Again, Councilwoman Justice, thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
And we have a special guest in house with us, is City Councilman Quentin Lucas, obviously running in the mayoral race for Kansas City. And we're glad to have you take some time to come and talk about the race with us this morning. Thank you so much.
Happy to be with you. Good to be here and see everybody in person here in the podcast studio.
I was, we had the show this morning. We're recording this on Monday morning, and I was talking about how many forums that you and Councilwoman Justice have done. I think 12 is what you have scheduled between now and Election Day,
Yes,
all
sir.
together.
Yeah, 12 total.
I've got to ask. I mean, do you get confused just about your own talking points? Does it run together at times whenever you're having to do that many?
You know, it does. I mean, after a while, you first of all know what the other person's going to say. So you're trying to still be unique, creative, new in some ways, but at the same time, you kind of know what's happening. So by the time we get to your debate, I hope we have some new, exciting questions, but a lot of Kansas Cityans care about some of those basics that they want us answering, and it's been a pretty good opportunity. We're going to every district. We're on most major media outlets, and so I think it's been good for Kansas City.
Our debate coming up on June the 12th, I believe, is when our
Yeah.
debate's going to be, which is just less than a week before the election. So that's a big time.
I think our debate is going to get those last minute undecided
Hope so.
voters. I think our debate's going to be important.
Right?
I hope that it is. And speaking of the debates, one thing I've noticed, your camp has been live tweeting
Yes.
the forums, I guess not debates, forums, which sometimes can prompt people to take things a little bit out of context. And so I noticed one thing that kind of came up on Twitter was, you had tweeted about, or your camp had tweeted about airports and stadiums
Yes.
not being, transformative.
Correct.
You have to invest in the city's poorest neighborhoods. I just kind of want to talk a little bit about that and give people the full context behind that tweet and why you felt like it was important to put out there.
Well, there was a question that was about should we fund a new downtown baseball stadium? And I think a lot of folks have said, yeah, that would be an interesting project to have, but we don't have the money right now. And the broader point I was making was that no matter how cool the city is, let's use, for example, Baltimore, which has a great downtown baseball and football stadium for that matter, a much better airport than ours in many ways, more flights, all those sorts of things, but it's a city with significant problems relating to violent crime, education, race relations, police community relations. So it's my view that you really need to have an important conversation about how you're making your city stronger rather than just one about what cool new thing can you have. And I think we see that there. We saw it in St. Louis. You see it in lots of American cities that have cool stuff, but haven't taken care of those community basics, real equity and equality in a community. And I think that's important to make sure we're focusing on neighborhoods, et cetera. Now, the Twitter conversation, like many conversations on Twitter, becomes kind of this either or, and everybody's saying, oh my God, you hate airports or stadiums or anything like that. I rather like both, actually. But I do think it's pretty important for us to make sure that we're also taking care of key things like not being on the top 10 most dangerous cities list, which we've been on for almost my entire life. Taking care of things like some of these vacant houses that I was walking the east side the other day. One lady was saying some of the houses on her block have been vacant for 20 years. I mean, those sorts of things that are the basics Kansas Cityans want us to address.
Between your personal history, just as a man,
Yep.
and in your own life, and your time on the council with housing and that kind of thing, obviously affordable housing has become a major tenet, if not the major tenet of your campaign.
Yep.
Is it the issue for you? Because it feels like you say so much comes from that. If you were a single issue candidate, would that be it?
Gosh, that's a good question, but you're a good reporter, so that makes sense. I think the answer would be yes. If you look at where crime heavily exists, where we have issues in the public schools, you can really tie it to neighborhoods.
Yeah.
You can tie it to housing issues, the lack of quality housing for people. It is very hard for a child to be able to focus if they're moving between 3 different schools within a school year, which is not as rare as we want it to be in Kansas City. It's very hard for us to fight illegal dumping if there are vacant lots everywhere with overgrown brush. And I think we do see a lot of issues in Kansas City arising out of where our housing stock is the most challenged and where people actually can't really afford to fix up houses, have that same kind of community investment we see in other places. You know, on this campaign, I get the chance to go to every part of Kansas City and some areas outside of it. And where you do largely see the most dumping issues, all of these other kind of quality of life challenges, or where we don't actually have quality, affordable housing available to people. So I'd like to see more rehab. I'd like to see people with an opportunity to age in place. And I would like to see us creating more housing opportunities for families that look to stay in the core of Kansas City, or even in aging parts of Kansas City, South Kansas City, Southern Clay County, et cetera.
So I have a two-part question. You probably want to answer the second part first.
Yes.
Part one is, it kind of seems like, after the primary, there are certain issues that both candidates, you and Jolie, would like to try to show some separation on. And correct me if I'm wrong, some people have seen the narrative as Jolie being a possible slide 2.0, Jolie being focused on incentives, transportation, and downtown. It seems like you have been the candidate who says downtown is thriving to a point, but now we need to focus on the rest of the city. So this is what you want to answer first. You were talking about affordable housing.
Yeah.
I've received some messages, and we'll ask Jolie this when we talk to her as well, of last Thursday's meeting. I just want you to be able to explain. Last Thursday's meeting, I believe, an affordable housing issue that you spearheaded was on the agenda. You were speaking at an event in southern Missouri. Why weren't you at the meeting?
Right. Yeah, I was asked actually several months ago to speak at an event about desegregation in Kansas City. I was on a panel with Alvin Brooks, the former city councilman and mayor pro tem, and just all around great man. John Kurtz, another guy who's been impactful in it, and a lawyer from the Kansas City Public Schools. And that was a commitment I made some months ago ironically, to a group of Kansas Cityans in southern Missouri, the Kansas City Bar Association. So, yeah, that was why I was not able to be there. In terms of that ordinance, which it's so interesting that all these people who didn't care before seem to care now, which I'm delighted by. The way all these housing ordinances came about was largely that I wrote all of them last August and last September. They number about 12. I'm the one who actually passed several of our first kind of affordable housing ordinances in a generation on this council. So that's an area I'm actually quite proud of. And if one wished to make a distinction, I have no qualms in saying that I think a lot of our good work is from those who are producing the most ordinances, producing the most substance, something I've done, and who are doing the most committee work. I'll open up a line of attack because there was a debate in Clay County where another councilwoman had suggested, well, you weren't at this meeting, the legislative session for an issue, when she had actually missed a committee meeting on it where we spent 3 hours actually talking about how to resolve the trash issue. And I introduced a motion to actually make sure things were moving in terms of how we resolve trash. So, which is a weird thing to say, but nevertheless, my view is this, right? The work of somebody on council, the work of a legislator, and the work of a mayor is making sure you're coming up with good ideas, impactful ones, visiting with community groups on them. I've probably spent, just on that individual ordinance you're talking about on housing, I probably spent maybe 30 hours meeting with groups about it. I met with Urban Neighborhood Initiative last week for about an hour and a half talking about that particular issue. I do it all the time, so I have no qualms talking about race relations and integration in Kansas City on a Thursday when council actually is not voting on passing the issue or not. And what I would say to anybody who actually cares so much about the issue, whether it be the councilwoman or one of the people who emails you all the time about those things, she had the opportunity, if she was so inclined, to actually try to pass it that day as well. I mean, if she is truly in support of it, or if anyone else is, I'd be happy to see my ordinances passed. I don't have to be there for it that day. I'm just happy to basically see people supporting it, and that happens all the time on city council.
It feels like the battle lines are really being drawn on council as we enter into these final weeks. One thing became especially clear last week with some of the endorsements. What was your reaction to, your colleague and your council in endorsing Councilwoman Justice?
I think everybody is, as you're noting, splitting their different ways. I certainly respect his choice. I'm excited to have the support of a councilwoman who also is Councilwoman Justice's colleague from the 4th District. And Councilwoman Shields has been at this for about 40 years in politics, trying to make a positive difference in Midtown neighborhoods in our whole region. And so, you know, in the battle of endorsements, I was very happy with mine, but I understand not everybody's going to like you, and that's okay because you know, it's about the voters, not necessarily endorsements. I mean, it was Sly James when he was running in 2011, who famously noted endorsements don't vote. And that's true, as he defeated somebody who had a heck of a lot of them. So what we're trying to do right now is make sure I'm talking to as many different communities as possible, how you end up on a panel about integration in the Kansas City, Missouri School District, and make sure people get a chance to know who I am. Because what I've seen throughout this race is that the more they get the chance to interact with me, the more they have the chance to actually see who I am and not just hear push polls and others that are being run by supporters of my opponent, then they actually see I'm a good guy who's got, I think, good substantive approaches to the future of addressing a lot of our problems in Kansas City.
Kat, I'm assuming you were talking about Councilman Jermaine Reed here that endorsed Councilwoman Justice last week on Twitter. I want to switch gears because you mentioned Mayor James here for a second.
Yeah.
A lot, obviously, in politics is made of filling shoes, so to speak, whenever, especially in the executive, when you're talking about a mayor or a governor or a president stepping into the role that has been previously inhabited by another person. Not just Mayor James, but how do you view the mayor's office right now as you get prepared to possibly step into it? What kind of shape do you see that position being in based on the way that Mayor James has been in the office for the last few years?
You know, I think he's been a fine cheerleader for Kansas City, and I think everyone would recognize that. He's someone who's very well known and has always been a big supporter of brand Kansas City. So I commend him on that. I also, as I've said many times, commend him on his years of public service, both in the city, to the Bar Association, the very one I was speaking at, and also certainly his Marine Corps service. I think, you know, we split on a few key issues, the first of which is what collaboration really means. I think that what we have not seen the last several years is a mayor that really speaks to the city council, much if at all. I think what we have not seen is all of us actually getting together to try to come up with solutions to collaborating on issues, as opposed to there being kind of this top-down approach of the mayor and others saying, well, this is what we're going to do, we're just going to do it and get on board or not. And I think on some issues like the airport and others, we had real significant growing pains on that very issue. And so I'd like to be someone, and I have been with my council service, someone who actually has gotten agreement from lots of folks. You know, contrary to the mayor's efforts on pre-K, where every superintendent disagreed with him, and that's 14, I was able to get 14 superintendents to agree with me on important incentive reform issues, on the tax breaks that we're levying downtown and other places. I think I'm somebody who, regardless of the endorsements, has introduced a number of ordinances, many of which Councilman Reed has co-sponsored, that I wrote, that relate to how to make housing more equitable in Kansas City, how to build more opportunities to resolve issues like contracting in Kansas City, all of those. So the mayor's office that I would have is, first of all, one that actually leads the city council and sees its role as being important in that. Second, talks to the business community and certainly doesn't say what my colleague Councilwoman Justice said a few debates ago, which was when she got the airport deal or idea, she told Burns and McDonnell and their consultants, now go meet with all the city council members. That's what the mayor or that's what a chair of a committee is supposed to do. That's not what you tell some outside consultant with a vested financial interest in the deal what to do. I think that was, just shirking clear responsibility, and I would have the exact opposite approach.
Do you think it's safe to say Kansas City is heading in the right direction, but you think there needs to be a new vision for the city?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty clear in most of what I say. I think if you meet with any neighborhood association, and this week I had the chance to meet with several from the Northland, West Waldo, Ivanhoe, et cetera. I think people are saying, look, we like good things. We like nice stuff, but we also want to take care of these long-term issues that are important to the future of our community. If you have 100+ homicides every year in Kansas City, it will not reach its best potential. If you continue to have housing vacancy at the rate it is on the east side and the Hickman Mills, Ruskin Heights area, South Kansas City, then you're going to have real issues. If you have neighborhoods that are clamoring for things like sidewalks and we're building new roads to nowhere to support economic development projects, then we're going to be off kilter in our infrastructure. You know, the great pothole crisis of 2019 is not a mistake. It's not just some mishap. It's poor planning. I think lots of the things that we have issues with reflect poor planning, and I think the taxpayers deserve an opportunity for us to actually address a lot of those things that they want us to take care of.
There are a couple issues I want to touch on that have been in the headlines a lot recently. One of which is the chief of police wrote a blog post about the mental health crisis amongst first responders and talking about how he doesn't have the funding in his current budget to hire the necessary resources. What was your reaction to seeing that blog post? Do you think that there is enough money in the budget for that, or is it something that needs to come from the feds?
Well, I mean, yeah, I'd love it all to come from the feds, but as somebody who's worked at least with a few federal departments in connection with the housing space again, you know, we have been cutting funding to safety net programs in our country since the Carter administration. And by the way, I hope President Carter's doing well. I know he fell and hurt his hip. But that's an issue. That's a significant issue. I was born after the Carter administration. Maybe several of you in this room were. And I think instead of waiting for the feds, what we need to do is, I think, be smarter with how we are actually spending our own dollars. I know that's much easier said than done. But there's an example right now. In Kansas City, we're thinking about and considering building a new Kansas City, Missouri jail. And by the way, for all you listeners out there, that's as distinct from a new Jackson County jail. So if you have the fortune of living in Kansas City, Missouri, the Jackson County portion of it, you could be spending up to $90 million in jails. 2 different jails. I guess they'll be cool and nice. That is not how we should be doing things. What we should be doing is saying, okay, let's actually just make a deal with the county. I know right now maybe the sheriff and the manager don't get along. I don't care, right? We shouldn't actually be wasting people's money on something like that. And instead, maybe the city has the opportunity with some of that extra money we would save to really spend on things like more beds in mental health facilities, more social workers, more people that can be out in the community connecting with folks in connection with these key issues. I mean, that's kind of what I think is going to be most important. It's not, at City Hall, here's the thing, right? We like to say we don't have money for stuff, and then we do a $100,000 study on downtown baseball, or we build a $9 million road to a speculative economic development deal so we can help a business fill a gap. Those are the misplaced priorities I'm trying to change. Because I agree with the chief. Mental health, substance abuse addiction, so many others are key issues to a lot of things in Kansas City. Crime, domestic violence, homelessness. And I do think it would be more important for us long term to do that. And what I disagree with my opponent on is that I'm not somebody who wants to wait for Jefferson City. As you caught this week, or you might have seen that I disagreed with some things they did in Jefferson City, as did she. I disagree routinely with what they do in Washington, although in fairness, they don't really accomplish much. So, I mean, I guess we just let them play in their sandbox. But it's my view that we really need local solutions to so many of our local problems, and that's the best way to address them.
And so specifically for mental health
Yep.
for police officers, since he talked a lot about wanting a psychiatrist on staff, you
Yep.
think that there is the money to do that? It just needs to be allocated in a different way?
I do think there's money to do that. Not that I think there's money to do that. I also do think, however, that in the same way that in many other industries, you either have your on-site medical care person or someone off-site, there are differences in healthcare approaches as to which is better. Do you feel like you have a better opportunity to be fully honest with someone who is off-site? I don't know. I haven't read in depth on that issue. I do think there is funding for that, and I think when you look at our annual healthcare plans there could be more work with that. On the city side, we actually do have an entire health clinic, which can get you some access to psychiatric care too. So that's available to firefighters, frankly, all of us at City Hall, and I think that's a good opportunity.
Councilman, elections are built on identifying different blocks of voters in a lot of ways and figuring out what group may support one candidate or one issue and that kind of thing. I think we have an interesting breakdown just in this room of different kinds of voters that you may encounter. We have men and women represented in this room. We have black and white represented in this room. But we also have something stark difference between you and all of us sitting in this room is that you are a native Kansas City person. You were born and raised in Kansas City. The rest of us are all transplants here to Kansas City and would be new voters potentially in this race. How do you see that breakdown between people who have been here for a long time and because I've only been here for about a year and a half and people have told me downtown Kansas City looks so much different than it did 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I've heard the word ghost town thrown around about how downtown Kansas City used to look compared to how it is now. Where do you see the breakdown and how important is it between people who've lived here all their lives and people who are new to town voting in this race?
Well, it's interesting how honestly I answer the question. If you look at voters, typically not just in Kansas City but anywhere else, they do skew largely older.
Yeah.
And they skew largely long-term resident as well. So I think it will be important for whoever wins this race to really win the person who's been in Kansas City for 30, 40 plus years, and that's a fascinating person because we've swung right from a K Barnes to a Mark Funkhauser to a Sly. But in terms of new Kansas Cityans, and I'm so happy to have you all here, and thank you for the earnings tax and that sort of thing. No, I mean, I think we need to continue to address how we can make Kansas City more attractive and better for them. I talk a lot about housing, and I think that is one thing that could be interesting for folks in terms of how are we building and developing neighborhoods that are interesting for people? How are we building greater walkability in those neighborhoods? And so that's going to be key. But also, some of the things that make Kansas City more attractive to folks. And to me, there's a balance there too. So I went to law school away from here and thought about not returning to Kansas City.
You were in New York for law school, right? At Cornell,
I was. And then I was considering one of those jobs in Washington, D.C. to be in the muck of all the lawyers and that sort of thing. And at the end, choosing between coming back to Kansas City or going to Washington to a good law firm. What was it that brought me to Kansas City? Back to Kansas City. It really wasn't family because they're drama, but it was the fact that when I came back here, I did see some of that positive upswing.
Yeah.
I saw the ability for folks to get involved fairly quickly, something you may all have seen, that you can kind of get access to anything here. So what I want to see us continue to do is to build more opportunities for folks to have walkable neighborhoods, no matter where they are, to see industry and the industries we attract as more of startup culture as opposed to just thinking we could expand factories.
Yeah.
The 21st century in Kansas City is not Harley Davidson. It is some business plan that somebody's thinking of right now. So, I mean, I think that's how I would see it. That being said, I actually do interact with new Kansas Cityans a lot, or newer Kansas Cityans, because that seems to be like 80% of KCMO Twitter are transplants.
Well, because that's something that showed up in the last election with the airport just recently, because that seemed to be kind of a line on that of the people who are voting one way may be, I've been here all my life, we don't need to change, ... versus, no, if we're going to move this city forward, I need a bigger airport than what we got right now. I need something different than what we have right now. And that seemed to kind of show up the last time people headed to the polls.
I think it started as that, but then long term, I think, you don't get to 70+% without getting the people who've been around a lot. And so I think when we talk about an issue long enough, or frankly, if you just give time for societal or other viewpoints to change, then you will see something. 10 years ago, the marijuana question, the decriminalizing of marijuana, would not have passed with over 70% of the vote. And I don't think that's just because now 70% of Kansas City smokes weed all the time.
You don't know. You don't know.
Sure don't. But nevertheless, I think that is a reflection sometimes in where we're meeting folks on issues. For us, it is identifying the right issues and making sure we're getting it right. Yeah. That's why I think it's so important for the next 4 years. We're talking about issues that really create equal opportunity for Kansas Cityans. We can't just talk about momentum. We're talking about momentum for neighborhoods throughout Kansas City. And that's something I've cared about.
As we get ready to wrap up part one of this podcast, because we will be talking to your opponent, let's talk about kind of the personal side of Quentin Lucas. Yeah. What gets you through, campaigning and doing your day job? You're shaking hands, you're kissing babies. What keeps you energized? What keeps you up?
Ooh.
Do you drink?
He's
'cause
not
you
a
don't,
coffee
Because I'm about to
drinker.
say you don't drink coffee.
I do not drink coffee.
I
So
don't
what do
either.
you
I don't
do?
either. People get. I'm the morning guy, and people make fun of me for not drinking
Well,
coffee.
coffee doesn't keep me awake. I
It's
just like
possible.
the taste.
It's possible to get through the day without
It
drinking
really
coffee.
is. It really is. Gosh, I'd give the political answer the honest one. Like the political one is just shaking hands with people.
It's the
Seeing-
energy
It's the
of
smiles on
people.
people's
Right,
faces.
right.
the
Seeing
energy
them
of the
say-
germs.
Right. Seeing them say thank you and God bless you.
I should note that he's giving a closed fist thumbs
Bill
up as
Clinton
he's saying.
thumbs
Don't
up.
point. It's knuckles.
Right, exactly. Just saying, I feel your pain. No, I think more to the point, look, all of us have our things that help us relax at given time. For me, it's largely sports. The Royals are pretty awful this summer,
Yeah.
so that hasn't been it. But as you know, during football season, I'm a huge fan. This station did a story on my Chiefs diary. I still love it and all that. But yeah, I mean, following sports in what I can in the NBA playoffs, although there's no reason to watch the Western Conference Finals.
Correct.
And that sort of thing. And then I have a good set of friends, like everybody else in America, who's blessed to still have their mother around. I have a mother who tells me things I'm doing wrong, where she's like, "I saw that Cat Reed interview you. She did not seem that nice to me."
What is her biggest critique of you so far?
Oh, what a good question.
That's a good follow up. You gotta listen.
God, what aren't her critiques?
And are they daily? Are they like,
they're-
here are the things you did wrong today?
They're pretty consistent, so I needed to buy a whole new set of suits, according to her. She's like, I just cannot believe you were on TV with those shoes and suits. And, there is also sort of, and this is a very nice critique, she is very big on making sure if I am somewhere or something like that, that I'll call somebody back or that sort of thing. And,
Yeah.
and that does matter a lot to people.
Yeah.
So that's why, sometimes I will, as I say often, I'd even put it on this podcast, although I put my cell phone number too many places. But on my mailers and flyers, if you get them, there is a cell phone number on that goes directly to me, which, is
That's
crazy. but
bold.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And then,
Did people try and talk you out of that when you were putting that on? Were people saying that's a bad idea?
Some did, but it started when I was on city council or when I was running for city council. And I just thought, what a better way to make sure somebody can really reach me and all of that. And, if they're too profane, I usually just
I was going to say, do you get some ugly ones during the day?
I do. It's crazy how angry some folks get about things that I don't think need to be anger-inducing.
Okay.
But they're just different ways in life. But yeah, she critiques mainly my appearance. She would like me to get married someday. I'm not. So.
Breaking news.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. You don't have to search those Jackson County records for that. And so, just those things.
I'm curious because every election takes a very intense personal toll.
Yep.
It's exhausting. Some people put on 15 to 20 pounds. It's all of those things. What has been hardest for you personally? I know that there was the issue of your personal life being brought into the race.
Sure.
Was that difficult? Just kind of talk
Yeah,
about
let's just get deep now.
Yeah.
Make
Right.
the
Let's go.
podcast fun.
Let's go.
Do it. It's a podcast, all of it.
Because I started y'all late too, so I'll just give you all the good stuff. So a few things. I'll start with the superficial and then get more substantive. Then we'll be crying and you'll all get Emmys or something.
I love it.
Or whatever the internet version is. A good tweet. But nevertheless, yeah, so the weirdest thing, and I shouldn't tell you this, I'm kind of a plant guy. And so I actually have like a lot of plants in my
That's
apartment.
oxygen.
Well,
Right.
that's something I
Right,
didn't
exactly.
know.
There you go.
Right.
Look
And
at
so
this.
among the plans, and I was about to tweet it, but then I thought it'd be stupid. Like every time you tweet your dog, cat, I'm like, I want to tweet about
My plants.
Right. I have this,
Your plants or your dog?
I had this beautiful, like 6'5" plant that just died maybe about 2 months ago. I had it for about 9 years.
You had it from a puppy, I assume? Like,
Right.
And saw it grow. And it had this, as I was a lawyer and running for council and all of that, I just have this thing and I have this view of downtown from my living room. And I would just like see sunsets and the plant and all of that. And, now it's dead and I put it out on the balcony and, a dead plant looks really deceased. And so, that was disappointing. That's the more superficial thing. But yes, I probably have like 7 or 8 kind
Really?
of sizable plants at my place.
Wow.
And
We learned something.
and like to get like kind of art, but art from the Art Institute and that sort of thing, and Kansas City Artists Coalition. So those are two of my things: plants and like very cheap art collections. Not not like a millionaire. In terms of impact on people around you, there are a few things. you don't get to spend time with your friends or loved ones nearly as much as you'd like. And sometimes they don't understand that, and that is frustrating, and then you don't have the time to follow up on it. And, you're always moving and that sort of thing. Let's think about election night. You all covered, and you're immediately talking to television news people or others. By the way, I want to commend you all because this is just so funny because the Kansas City Star clearly didn't think I was getting through the primary because they sent a photographer like an hour and a half later because we got the results pretty quickly. And then they were just like, hey, can you do some stuff for us?
So we can take your photo. Your
Right.
photo.
Can you walk
exactly.
around,
shake
I was
some
like,
hands?
It's like, no, yeah, you got to, just, I guess, get a TV image and still it, attribute it to somebody.
From 41, watch it on 41 Action.
Right.
Exactly. But, that's been tough. And then on the relationship sides of things, yeah, I mean, a campaign can really destroy one. And that's been tough. One of the things that I've liked the least is how some of those closest to me, get roped into this sort of stuff, who did not make a choice to run for office or do anything, and then they're subject to what I think are just totally BS, public records requests because they may work at institutions that are not Kansas City, Missouri, but you can do an open records request on almost anybody, I guess. It was with a public entity. I don't know what they're trying to prove other than like, ooh, Quentin Lucas knows an evil person or something who did such and such an Independence or Gardner or wherever. And that's, I think that's, unfair and uncalled for. I do think that there's been that negative tenor of this race. I don't think it needed to be that way. My campaign is not engaged in any of that sort of stuff. And I'm proud of that. So, I mean, that's politics. I guess, people, I had my opponent's actually campaign manager tweet at me. I elected not to respond, who was kind of like something like, that's life in the big leagues or something like that. And I'm like, first of all, calm down, son. But then second, it's just kind of like, we don't actually have to make this a race to the bottom all the time.
Yeah.
Right? We can actually have a positive conversation about the future of Kansas City without trying to cut at people. But, I think that's just a sign that we've been doing well in this race and better than they might have expected.
To end this, I'm going to try to be the last word.
You're not, because I've got one more I want to
Oh,
ask.
Lord. All right. Don't give the political answer because it's not going to be what you think. How many wins does the Chiefs have next year?
Ooh.
Or
Yeah.
will they go to the Super Bowl?
I mean, you can't make me be a hater, but
I was about to say, if you answer no, that's going
right,
to hurt a whole lot.
I mean, you can't say no, but you can say they'll go, but they won't win, or they might lose to Tom Brady again. Or
look. I mean, man, you won't get me in all types of other trouble. It's been an interesting offseason, right?
yeah, it has.
And I don't. It hasn't been the best offseason for on-field chances next year. We've got some work to do on the receiving core, for example, and so. It would be hard to match last year's performance.
Yeah.
That's a good answer. That's a good
Good
answer.
answer.
Last thing, if you lose, what's next for you? What does it look like moving forward if you are not the mayor of Kansas City?
I mean, I guess I go work at a lawn and garden store.
With that plant love.
That would be the awesome follow-up. Not for you, but for us.
If we bumped into you with
They're like,
be a great
Quentin Lucas
follow-up.
making
Yeah.
second chances. That's interesting. I continue to be on the faculty at the University of Kansas. And actually, the real answer, because you can look up, this is a good public record. I'm actually currently scheduled to teach contract law to first-year law students.
In the fall.
In the fall. 8 a.m. Monday, Tuesday,
8
Wednesday.
a.m.
So I either
So
win.
mayor or not.
Right. Well, if mayor, then unlikely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, no. But,
Yeah.
but if I'm unsuccessful, then like August 22nd, I'll be in a classroom teaching first-year contracts.
Wow.
To law students.
And they just graduated.
They did just the other day. It was touching because I had a class of 90 students. Myself, the class was bigger than that, but mine was 90, and they were like, it's so interesting because my favorite thing about teaching is they don't really care about any of the political stuff you're doing. So they're kind of like, that's mildly interesting. Or every now and then they'll be like, yeah, I saw you on TV,
What was that about?
whatever.
What was that about?
And then they change the channel. They're
Yeah.
like, I don't know what you were talking about. I
Yeah.
was bored. But
And they didn't like your suit either. Probably
Yeah.
the thing.
exactly. But it's been interesting to teach them and rewarding the whole time.
Well, Councilman Lucas, we can't thank you enough for taking some time out of a very busy campaign schedule to come and spend some time with us. As Stephen alluded to, we are going to have Councilwoman Jolie Justice in as well, and that hopefully we're going to be able to put those all together in one 41 Files podcast. So again, thank you again for joining us, and we will see you for 41 Action News on June 12th for our mayoral forum. Thank you so much.
Can't wait. See y'all soon.